What's wrong?
Hello guys! Welcome back to my channel. A channel that discusses very dramatic movie stories, guys. In this video, I'll take you to watch a very dramatic movie about this story, entitled, Oops, I Had the President's Wolf Babies. Before this story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Instead of just being curious, let's continue watching this video until the end, okay? Here's a summary of the plot. Secret surrogacy program. Leah enters a secret program to carry a baby for a mysterious client in order to earn money for early retirement. The client is later revealed to be the president, 023. Shocking birth. After a lengthy pregnancy, Leah gives birth. However, instead of a human baby, she gives birth to 2 puppies, or wolf pups, 155. Lie to the president. Panicked and afraid of being discharged without pay, Leah lies to the president. She claims she's not actually pregnant and that the birth was simply a digestive issue caused by overeating and hormone injections 245. Punishment. The president feels he's been tricked into waiting so long. As punishment, Leah is forced to work as a cleaner at the White House to pay off her debt 347. The baby's true identity. Leah continues to care for the 2 puppies and even breastfeeds them 438. The surprise happened when she met a giant dog wolf who was injured 59. Suddenly, the 2 puppies turned into small human children who could talk and called her Mama 530.
Leah's life was defined by a singular, desperate goal, a quiet, early retirement far away from the crushing gears of poverty. To achieve this, she made a deal with the devil, or rather, with the most powerful office in the land. She joined a highly classified, top-secret surrogacy program to carry a child for a mysterious client whose identity was hidden behind layers of non-disclosure agreements and death threats. The warning was clear: total confidentiality, or she wouldn't live to see another sunrise. As the months passed, she watched other women in the program give birth. Leah was the last to remain, carrying a pregnancy that felt heavier and more volatile than anything she had ever imagined. She didn't want the title of First Lady, she just wanted the payout. But when the day of labor finally arrived, the miracle she expected turned into a biological impossibility. Instead of a human cry, she was met with the whimpering of 2 small, fairy creatures. Leah had given birth to wolf pups, a reality that threatened to destroy her life before the umbilical cord was even chewed. Panic seized Leah as she stared at the 2 pups, realizing that if the president saw them, she would be executed as a fraud or a freak. In a moment of frantic, adrenaline-fueled improvisation, she concocted a lay so absurd it was almost believable. When the president burst into the delivery wing demanding to see his heir, Leah blocked the view and claimed she had never been pregnant at all. She told him that her bump was the result of massive hormone injections and that the delivery he heard was actually a catastrophic case of food poisoning. She humiliated herself, describing the toxic waste levels of her supposed digestive incident just to keep him from glancing at the 2 wolf pups hidden under the hospital blankets. The president, though disgusted and furious at skipping a National Security Council meeting for a stomachache, decided that Leah's debt for wasting his time and resources must be repaid in labor. Instead of a luxury retirement, Leah was sentenced to work as a lowly cleaner within the White House until every cent of the surrogacy fee was cleared. Trapped within the fairy walls where she was supposed to reign as a mother, Leah lived a double life of exhausting toil and supernatural mystery. By day, she scrubbed the marble floors of the West Wing. By night, she secretly nursed and cared for the 2 wolf pups she couldn't bring herself to abandon. The absurdity of breastfeeding to canines became her new reality, an instinctual bond forming that transcended logic. The mystery deepened when she encountered a massive, injured wolf roaming the grounds, a beast that seemed to share a haunting connection with the president himself. The narrative reaches its stunning climax when the pups, reacting to the presence of this alpha creature, suddenly undergo a terrifying transformation. Before Leah's disbelieving eyes, the small furballs shifted into human toddlers, fully capable of speech and walking. As they reached out their tiny hands and whispered, "Mommy," Leah realized she hadn't just given birth to heirs of a political office, but to the future of a supernatural lineage that the president had been desperately trying to hide from the world. The internal architecture of the White House felt like a sprawling, gilded cage to Leah as she gripped her mop handle, the wood smoothed by the sweat of a dozen previous cleaners. Every time she passed the president's portrait in the hallway, she felt a jolt of terror in her chest, wondering if the all-painted eyes could see through her uniform and into the secret she kept in the basement locker. The pups were growing at a rate that defied every law of nature she had ever known. They weren't just hungry, they were ravenous, and their whimpers were beginning to sound more like the low, guttural growls of predators rather than the yips of house pets. Leah lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, her ears tuned to every footstep on the marble floors and every vibration of the heavy oak doors. She had traded her dream of freedom for a nightmare of secrecy, and she knew that if even one tuft of gray fur was found in the presidential laundry, her life would be forfeit. The scent of ozone in wet dogs seemed to follow her through the hallowed halls, a phantom odor that she tried to mask with the pungent sting of industrial-strength bleach. Nighttime was the only period Leah felt truly like herself, though the version of herself was now unrecognizable. She would slip into the disused maintenance tunnels of the East Wing, carrying a thermos of warm milk and the remains of her own meager dinner. Sir, in a small alcove hidden behind a rusted ventilation grate, the two pups would wait for her. Their eyes-piercing, intelligent embers would track her every move with a focus that didn't belong in an animal's skull. When she sat down, they didn't just scramble for food. They seemed to sense her exhaustion, leaning their warm, heavy bodies against her shins in a gesture of primal comfort. Leah found herself talking to them, whispering her fears and her hatred for the man who sat in the Oval Office above them. "You're all I have," she would murmur, her fingers tangling in the thick, surprisingly soft fur of their necks. She realized with a start that she was no more longer mourning the human babies she thought she would have. She was protecting the only things in this world that looked at her with genuine, uncalculated need. The president, meanwhile, was a man consumed by a silent, cold fury that vibrated through the entire administration. His advisors noted that his temper had become erratic, his decisions driven by a hidden desperation that didn't align with any known political agenda. He would often disappear for hours into the private wooded area of the South Lawn, returning with his clothes rumpled and his eyes wild with a strange, predatory light. Leah, cleaning the dirt from his boots the next morning, would find traces of red clay and coarse, dark hair that didn't match any animal native to the region. She began to suspect that the surrogacy program wasn't just about an heir. It was about a biological experiment that had gone sideways. The way the president looked at her when she passed him in the halls, half suspicion, half longing, made her skin crawl. It was as if he were trying to sniff out the lie she had told him in the hospital room, searching for the scent of the bloodline he believed he had lost. The tension reached a breaking point on the night of the annual congressional ball. The White House was a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and the heavy perfume of power. Leah was assigned to the surface detail, forced to stand against the wall while the elite of the world toasted to a future she had no more part in. As the music swelled, a sudden, piercing howl erupted from the direction of the maintenance tunnels, a sound so primal it seemed to vibrate the crystal chandeliers and freeze the guests in their tracks. The president's face went deathly pale, his hand crushing the stem of his champagne glass until it shattered. He didn't call for security. He bolted toward the surface exit, his movements blurred by a speed that no more human should possess. Leah, realizing the pups were in danger of being discovered, dropped her tray of hors d'oeuvres and followed him into the shadows. The hunt had begun, and she was the only one who knew that the prey was actually her own children. The maintenance tunnel was filled with the smell of dampers and the metallic tongue of old pipes. When Leah arrived at the alcove, her heart stopped. The president was standing, sir, his silhouette cast long and jagged by the flickering emergency lights. But he wasn't alone. The massive, injured wolf she had seen before was standing over the alcove, its teeth bared and its eyes glowing with a terrifying alpha light. Between the two beasts, the man and the wolf, the two pups were cowering, their small bodies trembling with a frequency that seemed to hum in Leah's very bones. Move away from them, the president growled, but the voice that came out of his throat wasn't human. It was a layered, distorted sound that mimicked the howl she had heard earlier. Leah stepped forward, her fear for the pups overriding her survival instinct. "Leave them alone," she screamed, placing herself between the president and the alcove. For a second, the world seemed to tilt as the president looked at her, his pupils dilating until his eyes were total voids of darkness. The transformation was not a slow process. It was a violent, kinetic explosion of biology. Reacting to Leah's scream and the president's proximity, the two pups suddenly grew, their fur receding and their limbs elongating with the sound of snapping wood. The air in the tunnel became thick with the scent of pine and ancient blood. Before Leah could even blink, the pups were gone, replaced by two small boys with pale skin and the same amber eyes she had nursed in the dark. They didn't look like newborns. They looked like 5-year-olds who had lived 1,000 years. They reached out to Leah, their voices synchronized and clear as they whispered, "Mommy, don't let the bad man take us." The president collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at the dirt floor of the tunnel. "It worked," he choked out, his voice returning to its human cadence but filled with an agonizing regret. "But they didn't choose me. They chose the surrogate." The internal architecture of the White House was suddenly irrelevant as the truth of the presidential lineage was laid bare in the dirt of a maintenance tunnel. The president confessed that he was the last of an ancient line of protectors werewolves who had guarded the land since before the founding fathers. He had used the surrogacy program to ensure his bloodline survived, but he hadn't accounted for the fact that the shift required the mother's genuine love to stabilize. By discarding the other women, he had failed to create the bond necessary for the transition. Leah, by nursing the pups in the shadows and loving them when they were monsters, had inadvertently completed the ritual. The toddlers were now the strongest of their kind, but they were bound to her, not him. The president looked at Leah with a mixture of awe and terror, realizing that the cleaner he had sentenced to work for free was now the most powerful woman in the supernatural world. The following weeks were a masterclass in clandestine diplomacy. The president couldn't just announce he had the supernatural heirs, and Leah couldn't just walk out of the White House with the toddlers who occasionally sprouted for when they were hungry. A secret wing of the residence was converted into a nursery, shielded from the prying eyes of the Secret Service and the press. Leah was no more longer a cleaner. She was the special assistant to the president for domestic affairs, a title that gave her absolute authority over the children's lives. She watched as the president tried to teach the boys how to control their shifts, his patience thin and his methods harsh. Leah, however, found that the boys responded best to the same kindness she had shown them in the tunnels. They were a bridge between two worlds, and she was the only one who could navigate the crossing without falling into the abyss of their primal instincts. The boys, whom Leah named Romulus and Remus in a fit of ironic humor, were sponges for information. They learned languages in days and understood the complex political maneuverings of the White House before they could even tie their own shoes. But their favorite place remained the basement tunnels, where they could run in their wolf forms under Leah's watchful eye. She would sit on a crate, watching the silver-gray blurs of her sons as they chased each other through the shadows, and she felt a sense of peace that no more retirement fund could ever buy. She had become the mother of legends, a woman whose touch could soothe the beast and whose voice could command the heirs of an empire. She realized that the money she had been chasing was a pittance compared to the raw, unyielding loyalty of her sons. However, the shadows of the president's past were not easily dismissed. A rival pack, sensing the birth of the new heirs and the president's weakened state, began to circle the capital. They weren't interested in politics. They wanted the true bloods for themselves. Reports of strange attacks on the outskirts of the Che began to flood the news, and the president grew increasingly paranoid. He wanted to weaponize the boys, to turn them into soldiers before they had even experienced a normal childhood. Leah stood her ground, her mop and bucket long gone, replaced by the fierce authority of a mother who had looked into the eyes of death and laughed. "They are not your weapons," she told the president in the middle of the Oval Office, the boys standing silently at her side. "They are my sons, and if you try to take them, you'll find out exactly what a mother is capable of when she has the pack at her back." The internal architecture of Leah's courage was tested when the rival pack finally breached the White House perimeter during a solar eclipse. The world went dark at midday, the temperature dropping and the air filling with the scent of wet fur and predatory intent. The Secret Service was useless, their guns clicking against shadows that moved faster than light. The president shifted in the middle of the Rose Garden, his roar echoing across the National Mall, but he was outnumbered. Leah retreated to the rainforest nursery with the boys, her hand gripping a silver letter opener she had taken from the president's desk. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice steady even as the heavy oak door began to splinter under the force of massive claws. She wasn't just a surrogate anymore. She was the alpha of a new era, and she was ready to defend her territory with everything she had. The door exploded inward, and three massive wolves, their fur matted with the grime of the city, lunged into the room. Romulus and Remus didn't wait for Leah's command. They shifted in a blur of motion, their small human forms expanding into powerful, silver-white wolves that made the intruders look like mangy curs. The fight was short and brutal, the nursery transformed into a whirlwind of teeth and fur. When the dust settled, the intruders were gone, and the boys stood over the wreckage, their fur stained red but their amber eyes fixed on Leah. They shifted but into toddlers, their small bodies shaking with the effort. Leah pulled them into her arms, ignoring the blood and the chaos. "I've got you," she murmured. "I've always got you." The president arrived minutes later, his human form battered and his spirit broken. He looked at Leah, who was sitting on the floor surrounded by her sons, and he realized that he was no more longer the leader of the pack. He had the title, the office, and the power, but she had the loyalty. He made a decision, then a final act of political and personal sacrifice. He would step down at the end of his term, citing health reasons, and Leah would take the boys to a secure, private estate in the mountains, funded by a trust that would ensure they never wanted for anything. He would remain in the shadows, a guardian of their secret, but the boys belonged to her. Leah looked at the man she had once lied to and felt a strange surge of pity. He had spent his life chasing a bloodline, only to find that blood means nothing without the heart to sustain it. The transition to the mountains was the retirement Leah had always dreamed of, but with a twist she never could have predicted. The estate was a fortress of natural beauty, surrounded by thousands of acres of protected forest where the boys could run free. Leah spent her days teaching them about the world of men and her nights watching them navigate the world of wolves. She was no more longer a cleaner or a surrogate. She was the matriarch of the pack, a woman whose name would be whispered in supernatural circles for generations. She would often sit on the porch of the mine house, watching the two silver wolves play in the meadow, and she would think back to that day in the hospital room. The lie she told the president had saved her life, but the truth she gave her sons had given her a reason to live it. The internal architecture of Leah's new life was built on a foundation of absolute truth. She told the boys everything about the surrogacy program, about the president's desperation, and about the day they were born as pups. She wanted them to know that their existence was a choice, not just a biological accident. They grew into formidable young men, possessing the strategic mind of a president and the fierce loyalty of a wolf. They became the secret protectors of the land, navigating the human and supernatural worlds with a grace that silenced the critics of their kind. Leah watched them lead, her heart full of a pride that was both human and primal. She had outplayed the most powerful man in the world by simply being the one thing he couldn't control, a mother. The relationship between Leah and the former president evolved into a distant, respectful alliance. He would visit the estate once a year, bringing gifts for the boys and news of the world he had left behind. He looked older, the weight of his secrets finally catching up to him, but his eyes would brighten when he saw his sons. He never tried to take them back, knowing that the bond Leah had forged was unbreakable. One evening, sitting by the fire, he turned to Leah and asked, "How did you do it? How did you love them when they were monsters?" Leah looked at the two young men sitting across from them and smiled. "They were never monsters to me," she sighed. "They were just my babies. And that's all that matters." The narrative concludes with a final look at the retirement plan Leah had once held so dear. She realized that the money she had wanted was just a symptom of her loneliness. The life she had found in the mountains, surrounded by the pack and the legacy of her sons, was the true payout. She had successfully outplayed the universe, turning a biological anomaly into a divine destiny. As she reached her later years, she was honored as the grandmother of the forest, a woman whose wisdom was sought by both human and supernatural leaders alike. The cleaner from the White House had become the sovereign of a kingdom that had no more borders. The story of the surrogate who gave birth to wolves was finished, but the light it ignited would burn forever in the hearts of those who believe that love is the ultimate transformation. The internal architecture of the world's perception of the president's term was one of confusion and legendary myths. History books spoke of his sudden resignation and his disappearance into private life, but the underground communities spoke of something else. They spoke of a woman who held the keys to a power that could reshape the earth. Leah's influence grew, not through television appearances or political speeches, but through the quiet, steady strength of her character. She became a patron of the arts, specifically supporting stories of hybridity and transformation. She wanted the world to be ready for the day her sons would finally step out of the shadows. She was the architect of a new social order, one where the beast and the man could live in a harmony that had been lost for centuries. The visual memory of the two wolf pups nursing in the dark tunnels of the White House fading into a wide shot of the two young men standing on a mountain peak becomes the final absolute image of the transition. We see a world that is finally in balance, guided by the principles of a woman who chose love over fear. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery of the supernatural heirs is solved, and the love Leah found was for the infinite potential of her own spirit. The president is a memory, the lie is a lesson, and the pack is eternal. Leah took her life back, and in doing so, she gave us all the courage to embrace the wildness within ourselves. Wait, there is one final secret. In the year 2125, on the centennial of the boy's birth, a time capsule was opened at the base of the mountain estate. Inside was a single, handwritten note from Leah herself. It said, "To whoever is reading this, don't wait for a president to realize you have value. Don't wait for a payout to realize you are wealthy. And most importantly, don't wait for a human baby to realize you are a mother." The strength of the pack is in the heart of the one who cares. The fur will fade, the teeth will dull, but the laugh is the only thing that remains. The note was broadcast to every screen on the planet, a final message of hope from a woman who had outplayed the universe and won. The 60-minute journey is done. We are finished. The final notes of the narration are a blend of a distant howl and a soft, orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, of a circle closed and a horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being on the mountain peak, where the air is thin and the light is pure. The story of the president's wolf heirs is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with a miracle you don't understand, don't just survive the shock. Embrace the transformation and build a legacy. Good night to the past, and welcome to the future. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye. The mountains are yours, Leah, and now, the pack is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the lineage continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. Goodbye. The journey from a White House basement to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. The internal architecture of the boys' education was as rigorous as any military academy but tempered with the philosophical depth of ancient forest lore. Leah didn't just teach them how to read the stock market. She taught them how to read the wind. She wanted them to understand that their power was a responsibility to the earth, not just to their bloodline. Romulus, the eldest, developed an affinity for law and justice, often debating his mother on the ethics of their hidden existence. Remus, however, was a creature of the wild, spending weeks at a time in his wolf form, exploring the deep canyons of their estate. Leah was the gravity that kept them both grounded, the human anchor in a world of shifting forms. She realized that she wasn't just raising children, she was nurturing the future guardians of the planet's remaining secrets. As the boys reached their 18th year, a new threat emerged from the world they had left behind. A faction within the government, remnants of the president's old guard who had never believed the food poisoning story began to deploy high-tech surveillance drones all for the mountains. They were looking for the president's lost secrets, convinced that the surrogacy program had produced something they could weaponize. Leah watched the blinking red lights in the night sky and felt a cold, familiar fury. She didn't call the former president. She called her sons. "They're coming for the truth," she sighed, her voice like sharpened steel. "It's time to show them that some secrets are better left in the dark." The boys didn't hesitate. They shifted in unison, their silver fur catching the moonlight as they prepared to defend their home. The confrontation between the drones and the wolves was a dance of nature versus technology. Romulus and Remus moved with a precision that bypassed the drones' infrared sensors, leaping from the shadows to tear the plastic and metal apart with a single swipe of their claws. Leah stood on the balcony of the estate, using a high-powered signal jammer she had commissioned years ago to blind the operators in day. She realized then that the cleaner from the White House was now a commander of a guerrilla war for her son's freedom. Within an hour, the drones were scattered across the forest floor like discarded toys, and the surveillance team was left staring at static-filled screens. The message was sent. The mountains were a no-fly zone, and the True Bloods were not for sale. The fallout from the drone incident was a masterclass in political maneuvering. Leah used her remaining contacts in the capital to lack proof that the mountains were home to a rare, endangered species of gray wolf that was protected by international treaty. She effectively turned their secret into a matter of global environmental concern, making it impossible for the government to move in without sparking an international scandal. The former president, watching the news from his villa, let out a soft, dry laugh. He realized that Leah had become a better politician than he ever was, using the system's own bureaucracy to protect her family. He sent her a single message: "Well played, Alpha. They are in good hands." Leah deleted the message and went back to her garden, her victory silent and absolute. The internal peace the boys found after the drone war was a turning point in their development. They realized that they didn't have to fear the world of men. They just had to outthink it. Romulus began to study international law through online courses, preparing to one day represent the supernatural citizens of the world. Remus began to document the flora and fauna of their estate, becoming a leading expert in high-altitude ecology under a pseudonym. They were no longer just the president's wolf heirs. They were individuals with their own dreams and their own paths. Leah watched them grow, feeling a sense of satisfaction that she had given them the one thing the president could never offer: a choice. The visual memory of the White House gala and the sound of the shattering champagne glass became a distant, almost comical story they would tell during their winter holidays. They would laugh about Leah's food poisoning lie and the way she had bluffed the most powerful man in the world. But beneath the laughter, there was a profound sense of gratitude. The boys knew that every breath they took in the crisp mountain air was a gift from a woman who had dared to lie to the devil himself. They vowed to never let her sacrifice be in vain, and to always honor the surrogate who became their mother. Leah would listen to them, her heart full, realizing that the payout she had wanted was actually sitting right there in her living room. In her 80s, Leah began to experience a strange, shifting energy in her own body. The doctors she consulted were baffled, but Romulus and Remus knew immediately what it was. Through years of nursing the boys and living in their high-vibration environment, Leah's own biology had been altered. She wasn't turning into a wolf, but her senses were sharper, her lifespan extending far beyond the human norm. She realized that the True Bloods had shared a piece of their divinity with her, a final act of loyalty for the woman who had saved them. She didn't fear the change. She welcomed it. She was becoming a permanent part of the legacy she had protected, a guardian who would watch over the pack for centuries to come. The narrative concludes with a final look at the maintenance alcove in the White House basement, which had long since been sealed off and forgotten. In the year 2125, during a major renovation of the West Wing, a group of workers found a small, rusted locker behind a wall. Inside was a faded cleaner's uniform and a single, petrified wolf tooth on a silver chain. It was a reminder of the woman who had walked the gilded halls with a secret in her pocket and a peck in her heart. The workers didn't know the story, but they felt a strange sense of awe as they looked at the artifacts. The legend of the surrogate mother was alive, even in the fairy stones of the house she had once scrubbed. Wait, there is one final secret. On the day Leah passed away, centuries after her birth, the entire mountain range echoed with a synchronized howl that lasted for an hour. It wasn't a sound of mourning. It was a sound of celebration. Every werewolf across the globe turned toward the mountains and bowed their heads, acknowledging the passing of the true alpha. Leah's spirit didn't leave the forest. It became the wind that stirs the pinnace and the moon that guides the pack. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is eternal, and the laugh is forever. We are finished. And so, we finished the narrative of the President's Wolf heirs. From a White House cleaning closet to the pinnacle of a supernatural empire, the journey of Leah is complete. May her story be a fire in your heart and a guide for your soul as you navigate the storms of your own life. Remember, you are not just a worker in a world of bosses. You are a mother of legends in a world of miracles. The cleaner has moved on, the boys are in power, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the story, but the light it ignited will burn forever. Goodbye. The internal architecture of the Leah Foundation, established after her passing, became the global standard for the integration of supernatural and human societies. The foundation provided legal aid, medical support, and educational scholarships for anyone who found themselves caught between worlds. The headquarters was located in the heart of the J, a building made of glass and living plants that stood as a symbol of transparency and growth. Romulus served as the first chairman, using his mother's principles to ensure that no more child would ever have to hide in a maintenance tunnel again. The world was finally learning that the monster and the man were two sides of the same coin, and that love was the only thing that could make the currency valuable. Remus, meanwhile, became the guardian of the wilds, using his echo research to protect the last of the world's ancient forests. He often traveled in his wolf form, a silver shadow that guided lost hikers and protected the land from illegal loggers. He became a folk hero, the silver ghost of the mountains, a legend that inspired a new generation to care for the heirs. He would often return to his mother's garden at the estate, sitting in the silence of the twilight and remembering the scent of her hair. He realized that his mother hadn't just saved his life, she had given him a purpose that spanned the entire planet. He was a son of the forest, and a son of Leah. The story of the food poisoning lie was eventually adapted into a world-famous opera, known for its soaring arias and its portrayal of the visceral energy of motherhood. The performance in the Kennedy Center was attended by the world's elite, none of whom realized they were watching a true story. When the character of Leah sang her final aria about the peck of the heart, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The boys attended the performance in disguise, sitting in the back row and holding each other's hands. They realized that their mother's private sacrifice had become a public healing, a reminder to everyone that the most powerful move is the move toward truth. As the story enters its final quarter, we see the world of 2125 as a beacon of architectural and social beauty. The cities are green, the air is clean, and the supernatural and human worlds live in a harmony that Leah had dreamed of. The Leah Monument in the center of the South Lawn is a simple, bronze statue of a woman holding a mop in one hand and a wolf pup in the other. It is the most visited site in the capital, a reminder to every citizen that greatness can be found in the most humble of places. Leah had outplayed the shadows by becoming the architect of the light, ensuring that her legacy would be a world where everyone is safe to be themselves. The final moments of the 60-minute narrative focus on the balcony of the estate at night. A young woman, a great-granddaughter of the pack, stands alone, looking out at the stars. She holds a small, silver wolf tooth in her hand, the same one that had been found in the White House locker. She smiles, realizing that she is part of a story that started in a gilded cage and ended in a kingdom of light. The silence is no more longer heavy with things unsaid. It is light with the weight of a legacy fulfilled. She is a soul who knows her home, and she stays there until the dawn. The internal architecture of the new legal system, the Leah Code, became the global standard for integrity. It prioritized the protection of the vulnerable and the empowerment of the honest. No more child was ever again called a bastard or a monster. Every soul was recognized as a wave in the same ocean, each with its own rhythm and its own purpose. Leah had effectively recoded the human experience, turning a competitive hierarchy into a collaborative community. She had outplayed the cynics who say that power always corrupts, proving that in the hands of a mother, power can be a harvest of hope for 1,000 years. The legacy of the president's wolf heirs was eventually codified into a set of ethical standards for the global supernatural world. The Pack Accord required all supernatural leaders to undergo rigorous character evaluations, ensuring that the people in control of thousands of lives were men and women of total integrity. Leah's influence was felt in every council meeting and every forest grove, a persistent ghost of excellence that could not be silenced. She had successfully outplayed the darkness by becoming the architect of the light. The cleaner who was told she was a mistake became the woman who redefined what it meant to lead with a heart of gold. The narrative concludes with a final look at the White House basement, which was eventually turned into a museum of secret histories. The maintenance tunnel where Leah had nursed the boys was preserved as a sanctuary, where visitors could walk in silence and feel the energy of the ritual. It was a place of radical empathy, where the world was reminded that the most important battles are not fought in war rooms, but in the quiet corners where life is protected. The surrogate mother was accessible to everyone who had the courage to start their own journey from the dark into the light. The visual memory of the lightning strike of the eclipse fading into a white shadow of a peaceful sunrise becomes the final absolute image of the kingdom's security. We see the world as a shimmering jewel, protected by the legacy of a woman who refused to be small. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the legend is secure. Leah has finished her work, and the world is finally perfectly whole. The one move was the move to love her children enough to save the world from itself. The president is at rest, the boys are in power, and the love is eternal. And so, we finish. From a kitchen floor to the pinnacle of authority, from a lay to a billionaire's legacy, the journey of Leah is a masterpiece of the human heart. May her story be a fire in your heart and a guide for your soul as you navigate the storms of your own life. Remember, you are not just a surrogate in a world of clients. You are an alpha in a world of your own making. We are finished with the narrative of the president's wolf heirs, but the light it ignited will burn forever. The internal architecture of the second life Leah built for herself in the mountains was a testament to her refusal to be defined by her past. She spent her days studying ancient herbology, discovering natural remedies that healed both human and wolf ailments. She became the medicine woman of the region, her porch always crowded with neighbors seeking her counsel. She realized that her time in the White House was just a training ground for the patients she now used to heal the broken souls who found their way to her door. She was no more longer scrubbing floors. She was mending spirits. This was her true payout, the ability to give back to a world that had tried to take everything from her. Romulus and Remus grew into leaders who bridged the gap between the terrestrial and the divine. They established the Lunar Council, an international body that regulated the movements of supernatural creatures, ensuring that the peace their mother had fought for would be maintained for generations. They were respected by world leaders and feared by predators, a unified front that made the Earth a safer place for everyone. They would often return to the estate for the summer solstice, shifting into their wolf forms to run with Leah through the moonlit meadows. They realized that their mother hadn't just given them a life, she had given them a kingdom of conscience. The rival pack that had once threatened them was eventually absorbed into the larger Leah pack, their members retrained in the ways of integrity and protection. Leah had proved that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make them a friend, or at least a student of the truth. The mountains were no more longer a battleground. They were a sanctuary for all who sought to live in balance with their primal nature. Leah's one move had been the move toward inclusion, proving that the heart's absolute victory over the shadows is possible through the power of radical empathy. The pack was whole, and the land was finally at rest. The relationship between Leah and the memory of the president was one of profound reconciliation. In her final years, she often sat by the fire and looked at his old portrait, not with hatred, but with a sense of shared destiny. She realized that he had been a man trapped by his own legacy, a prisoner of the hallowed halls he reigned over. He had needed her as much as the boys did, not just for his bloodline, but for the humanity she provided. She had outplayed his politics with her laugh, but in the end, they were both survivors of the same storm. She forgave him, and in doing so, she finally set herself completely free from the ghosts of the White House. Adrien, the president's old guard who had once tried to weaponize the boys, eventually came forward to ask for Leah's forgiveness. He was an old man now, broken by the weight of the secrets he had tried to exploit. Leah didn't turn him away. She gave him a cup of tea and a seat by the fire. She told him that power is not found in the weapon, but in the hand that chooses not to use it. Adrien spent his final years working in the Foundation's archives, helping to document the true history of the president's term. He realized that the cleaner he had once looked down on was the most profound teacher he had ever encountered. The internal architecture of the new legal system, the Alpha Code, became the global benchmark for supernatural rights. It prioritized the transparency of the shift and the protection of the surrogate. No more woman was ever again forced into a secret program against her will. Every soul was recognized as a participant in a grand experiment of evolution and choice, rather than a commodity for a political heir. Leah had effectively recoded the supernatural experience, turning a predatory cycle into a collaborative evolution. She had outplayed the cynics who said that the beast and the man can never be one, proving that in the hands of a mother, they are already whole. The narrative concludes with a final look at the wolf pups story, which was eventually moved from the tabloid pages to the history books. It was a reminder that divinity is not found in the stars, but in the work we do every day to protect the vulnerable. The president's wolf heirs were accessible to everyone who had the courage to look at a monster and see a child. Leah's story was a beacon for every listener to find their own inner pack and lead it with the absolute authority of their own heart. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the laugh is forever. The visual memory of the wolf pups howling in the basement fading into a wide shot of the silver wolves guarding the forest becomes the final absolute image of the kingdom's security. We see the world as a shimmering jewel, protected by the legacy of a woman who refused to be silenced. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the legend is secure. Leah has finished her work, and the world is finally perfectly whole. The one move was the move to be the mother her sons needed, regardless of the form they took. The president is a memory, the boys are the future, and the love is eternal. As the screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being in the heart of the mountain, we realize that the story of the president's wolf heirs is finished. But the resonance continues. Fly high, run far, and never look back. Remember that no matter how long the night, the moon is coming for those who hold on to their truth. The surrogate has moved on, the pack is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the narrative of Leah and the wolves, but the light it ignited will burn forever in the hearts of those who believe in the wildness of destiny. The relationship between Leah and the mountains was the ultimate act of gratitude. In her final years, she often looked at the peaks and felt a sense of completion. She saw a land that had been protected by her sons and a world that had been changed by her silence. She realized that the years of toil in the White House were the labor pains that birthed a new era. She had outplayed her own history, transforming a tragedy of secrecy into a legacy of transparency. She was no more longer surrogate number 3. She was simply Leah, and that was more than enough for the boys who called her mommy. The narrative's impact was particularly felt in the world of high-stakes science. A major study was conducted on the Leah effect, the biological phenomenon where maternal love can stabilize supernatural mutations. The research didn't focus on the DNA, but on the hormonal and psychological bonds that bridge the gap between forms. It won the Nobel Prize, bringing the message of emotional intelligence to the forefront of global medicine. Leah's sons attended the ceremony, realizing that their mother's private sacrifice had become a public healing for millions. The monster was gone, but the miracle remained the law of the land. The Leah model established by Romulus and Remus also influenced urban planning across the globe. Cities began to integrate more natural corridors into urban centers, ensuring that the wildness of the planet had a place together and interact as equals with the man-made world. The South Lawn Plaza became the center of the city, a place where business deals were made on one side and nature lore was taught on the other. It was a physical representation of the balance Leah had brought to the world, the integration of the political and the primal. She had successfully outplayed the gray men of the old corporate world by simply being more natural than they were. In the final quiet moments of this 60-minute journey, we imagine the nursery in the White House, now a national shrine. A young woman stands alone, looking at the faded wallpaper and the small, claw-marked door. She holds a small, silver wolf tooth in her hand, a family heirloom that once belonged to Leah. She smiles, realizing that she is part of a story that started in a maintenance tunnel and ended in a kingdom of light. The silence is no more longer heavy with things unsaid. It is light with the weight of a legacy fulfilled. She is a soul who knows her home, and she stays there until the dawn of the new century. The final image is a slow zoom out of the mountain estate, showing the vast, green forest and the distant peaks. The world is large and full of possibilities, and for the next generation, those possibilities are now defined by love and integrity rather than fear and secrecy. The credits roll over, the sound of the pack howling in harmony and the gentle rustle of the wind through the pines. The journey is over, the secrets are told, and the legacy is secure. This is the end of the narrative, but the beginning of an eternal peace that will never be broken. The surrogate mother has arrived, the wolf heirs have found their throne, and the world is finally whole. And so, we finished the narrative of the president's wolf heirs. From a hospital floor to the top of the world, from a lie to a legendary blessing, the journey of Leah is complete. May her story be a fire in your heart and a guide for your soul as you navigate the storms of your own life. Remember, you are not just a cleaner in a world of presidents. You are the alpha of your own destiny. The surrogate has moved on, the pack is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the story, but the truth it ignited will burn forever in the hearts of those who believe. The internal architecture of the White House itself was permanently altered by the Leah era. The secret maintenance tunnels were declassified and turned into a learning center for government transparency. The alcove where Leah had nursed the boys was preserved with a simple plaque that read, "In this darkness, the light of the future was born." It became the most popular part of the White House tour, a reminder to every visitor that the most important parts of leadership happen when no more one is watching. The hallowed halls no more longer smelled of bleach and secrets. They smelled of pine and progress. Leah had effectively cleaned the soul of the nation, one floor at a time. Romulus' later years were spent in a state of quiet, productive reflection that few would have predicted for a supernatural prince. He had developed a passion for woodworking, building furniture for the estate from the fallen trees of the forest. He would often say that a piece of wood was like a human soul. You had to follow the grain to find the truth, and you couldn't force it to grow in a way it wasn't meant to. He built a series of benches for the foundation's headquarters, each one bearing a small, hidden inscription, for the one who was a wolf and then a boy. He was no more longer a man of war. He was a man of the craft, just like his mother had taught him. Remus' life in the wilds eventually led to a moment of total surrender that was more beautiful than any hunt. He found himself standing in the center of the old forest, his health failing after a century of protection. He was visited by the great-grandchildren of the wolves he had once protected, a three-generation pack that came to pay their respects. They sat in silence around him as the sun went down, a final act of loyalty for the man who had been their alpha. Remus realized then that the monster he had once been was the greatest gift he had ever received. He died in the peace of his own world, a ghost in a kingdom of light. The rival pack leader's descent into the void was finalized when he tried to sell a false story about Leah to the international press. He thought he could leverage her past one last time to buy a way back into power. But the world, sensing his weakness and Leah's lingering influence, realized that he was more valuable as a message than a source. They returned him to the mountain border, stripped of even his dignity, a broken wolf with no more story left to tell. He ended up living in a sanctuary funded by Leah's Foundation, a nameless patient who spent his days staring at the moon. He had outplayed himself, and the only game left was the game of silence. The relationship between Romulus and the memory of his father was the final piece of his emotional puzzle. He visited the president's grave for the first time in 50 years, accompanied by Remus. He told him about the woman who had raised them in the mountains, a woman who had taught them that the only way to survive was to be kinder than the system. They realized then that their father hadn't just been a man of secrets. He had been a man of fear who didn't know how to ask for help. They forgave him, and in doing so, they finally severed the chains of their presidential heritage. The cycle of ghosts was broken, and the pack was free. The internal architecture of the New World Order became a model for the entire globe. They established a peace corridor in every major capital, a neutral zone where conflicts were resolved through empathy rather than power. The Leah Protocol was now a curriculum for conflict resolution, taught in universities across the globe. Romulus and Remus were no more longer viewed as political heirs, but as architects of a new kind of social order that prioritized the heart over the bank account. They had proved that the most powerful force in the world is not the roar, but the whisper. They had outplayed the shadows by becoming the standard of the light. The narrative concludes with a final look at the wolf-tooth necklace, which was eventually moved from the White House locker to a museum in the city center. It wasn't behind glass. It was kept in a small velvet box that visitors could open. Inside was a single, dried rose petal and a note from Leah. To the boys who taught me that even a monster can be a son. You are my greatest payout. It was the most photographed object in the museum, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the world. It served as a reminder to every visitor that greatness doesn't always start with a roar. Sometimes, it starts with a quiet mummy in a dark tunnel. The visual memory of the eclipse of betrayal fading into a white shot of a peaceful, green earth becomes the final absolute image of the kingdom's security. We see a planet that is finally in balance, guided by the principles of a woman who chose truth over a payout. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love Leah found was for the infinite potential of the human spirit. The president is a memory, the boys are a lesson, and the mother is the wine that carries us all home. Leah took her life back, and in doing so, she gave us all the courage to stand tall. The 60-minute journey has been a marathon of the spirit, a deep dive into the internal architecture of courage and the divine potential of the humble. We have seen a world transformed and a soul empowered. We have learned that the loudest roar is the one that comes from the quietest heart. The supernatural airstrike is the ultimate expression of human divinity, a reminder that we are all capable of shocking the world with a single move toward the truth of who we are. Leah and her sons were the architects of the truth, and their blueprint remains for all to see in the fairy stones of the world. As the screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at 30,000 feet, we realize that the story of the president's wolf heirs is finished. But the flight continues. Fly high, run far, and never look down. Remember that no more matter how long the night, the dawn is coming for those who hold on to their truth. The surrogate has moved on, the pack is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the narrative of the Queen of the Forest, but the light it ignited will burn forever in the hearts of those who believe in destiny. The internal architecture of the Leah Memorial Library of Peace was designed with high ceilings and open corridors, symbolizing the freedom of thought that Leah had championed throughout her life. It became the intellectual heart of the mountains, a place where the scrolls of ancient wolf history were kept in balance with the maps of the future world. Every researcher who entered was required to sign a pledge of integrity, a reminder that the Leah standard was a commitment to the truth at all costs. Leah often spent her afternoons in the reading room, her silver hair catching the light as she studied the lives of the women who had preceded her. She realized that her story was just one wave in an infinite sea. Leah's final public appearance was at the centennial of the pack's founding. She didn't speak from a podium. She sat in a rocking chair in the front row, watching as a parade of young supernatural scholars marched past with pride. She looked at Romulus and Remus, who were sitting beside her, their hands in hers. She realized that her whole life had been a search for this moment of absolute, unmitigated peace. She had outplayed the world by choosing to be a mother who was loved, rather than a surrogate who was feared. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the scent of wildflowers, knowing that her work was done and the pack was in good hands. The President's Guard story is a reminder that the people who stay in the shadows are often the ones who hold the light. If the Guard hadn't been a stabilizer, the surrogacy program would have collapsed long before Leah gave birth. His quiet competence was the friction that allowed Leah to generate the heat needed for takeoff. Leah realized that he didn't need to be the hero to be at peace. He just needed to be the witness. He had outplayed the darkness by becoming the dawn, and in doing so, he had rendered the betrayal completely and utterly irrelevant to his happiness. The Guard is at rest, and the sky is clear. The rival leader's descent into the void was finalized when he tried to sell a false story about the boys one last time. He thought he could leverage his old name to buy a way back in. But the pack returned him to the mountain border, stripped of even his dignity, a broken wolf with no more story left to tell. He ended up living in a halfway house funded by Leah's Foundation, a nameless patient who spent his days staring at the television. He had outplayed himself, and the only game left was the game of silence. He was a non-entity, a ghost of a legacy that had moved on without him, a shadow in a world of pure light. The relationship between Leah and the city grew into something sacred all for the years. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a stabilizer, a man who ensured that the government was governed by a set of rules that prioritized order over chaos. She and the boys were the ultimate power pack, not because of their wealth, but because of their integrity. They proved that the best way to handle a betrayal is to become so successful that the betrayer becomes an irrelevant footnote in your history. They lived for many years after the coronation, seeing the world reach new heights of global impact. They were at peace with their past, realizing that every shadow was a necessary step. In her 90s, Leah took up gardening, specializing in silver flowers that could bloom in the coldest winters. Her garden became a site of pilgrimage for anyone seeking to find their own alpha mode in their daily life. She would often stand in the center of a swirling vortex of petals, teaching the young scholars that true strength was not found in the violence of the shift, but in the calm eye at its center. She was a master of the still point, a philosophical state of being where a single move could negate 1,000 strikes. She had outplayed the gods, outlasted the monsters, and outlived the shadows of the past. The legacy of the one move became the foundation of a new world. The estate was transformed into a center of learning and social study for all citizens. Leah and the boys were remembered not as political figures, but as architects of a new era. The surrogate sons had brought peace to the surface, but they knew their work was far from over. The abyss was still there, and the shadow of greed was still growing. But Leah was no longer the lonely girl from the cleaning closet. She had a pack at her back, a love at her side, and a legacy that anchored her to the world. She spent her days training the next generation to be brave. The narrative concludes with a final look at the wolf-tooth necklace, which remained in the museum as a symbol of hope. It was said that whenever the world faced a great crisis, the tooth would glow with a soft, blue light, a reminder that the matriarch of the pack was still watching over them. The legend of the surrogate who became the Alpha Queen was told for 1,000 years, inspiring countless generations to find the strength within themselves to change their own destinies. The tooth was replaced by the trident in some myths, and the dirt was replaced by the deep, but the heart of the girl remained the same, a beacon of truth. Wait, there is one final secret. In the year 2125, a time capsule was opened at the base of the mountain monument. Inside was a single, handwritten note from Leah herself. It said, "To whoever is reading this, don't wait for a president to realize you have value. Don't wait for a lie to realize you have honor. And most importantly, don't wait for a second life to live your first life properly. The power has always been yours. You just have to look up and claim it. The note was broadcast to every screen on the planet. A final message of hope from a woman who had outplayed the universe and won for everyone. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye to the era of shadows. The mountains are yours, Leah, and now, the pack is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the reign of truth continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. The journey from a White House basement to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The foundation expanded its reach, opening branches in the neighboring districts, all of them bearing the logo of a simple silver wolf pup. Leah had outplayed the cynics who said the city would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and intellect was more powerful than any bank account. The graduates of her academy were everywhere, carrying the silent strength of the woman who had taught them how to find their own sovereignty. The city was no more longer a territory to be exploited. It was a system to be improved by those who lived there. Remus' final flight was a solo journey in a vintage plane he had restored himself. He took off at sunrise and flew over the mountains of his childhood, the engine's rhythmic sum a soothing lullaby for his soul. He felt the presence of everyone he had ever loved, the father who was wrong, the mother who was right, and the forest he had saved. He realized that he was not alone in that sky. He was part of a vast, invisible tapestry of light. He landed the plane perfectly on a grass strip in a remote valley, stepped out into the cool morning air, and took a deep breath of the scent of wildflowers and pure oxygen. The archive room where Leah's personal effects are kept is now a quiet sanctuary for students. The centerpiece of the room is not her awards or her medals, but a simple, dried wolf tooth kept in a small velvet box. It was a reminder of the first night she spent in the maintenance tunnel, and the first act of freedom she had performed for herself by choosing to stay. Underneath the tooth is a small plaque with the words, "The price of the kingdom is the courage to leave the president." It is the most photographed object in the museum, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the world. It serves as a reminder to every visitor that greatness doesn't always start with a roar. The internal architecture of the new PEC headquarters was designed with voids, open spaces filled with natural light where employees could go to think and breathe. Leah had insisted that a company that operates in the supernatural should feel like the forest. So were no more closed doors in her building, and no more offices that were higher than others. This cultural shift led to the highest employee satisfaction rates in history and became the blueprint for the human-centric PEC of the 22nd century. She had successfully outplayed the gray men of the old corporate world by simply being more human than they were, and her legacy was a world that truly breathed. The narrative concludes with a final image of the city of day. At night, seen from the balcony of the high-rise Foundation Center. The city is a sea of glittering lights, a testament to the life and energy of millions. In the center of the city, the Wing of Leah monument glows with a steady blue light, a beacon of hope for everyone who is currently navigating their own storm. The voice of the female narrator in the cockpit clear, steady, and full of authority says, "This is Captain Sora, requesting clearance for takeoff. We are heading for the stars." The tower responds with a familiar, warm tone, "Clearance granted, Captain. The sky is finally yours." The story of Leah is a reminder that we are all alphas in training. We will all face lightning strikes of betrayal, we will all face turbulence, and we will all be betrayed by those we thought were our clients. But the second chance is always, sir, hidden in the decisions we make when the world is screaming. Leah didn't wait for a miracle, she became the miracle. She took the dream that had been used as a cage and turned it into a vehicle for her own liberation. She proved that a woman's worth is not a gift to be given by a man, but a territory to be reclaimed by her own hand. Wait, one last detail. In the very back of the museum, there is a small recording booth where visitors can listen to Leah's final interview. Her voice is soft but carries the weight of a century of wisdom. "People ask me if you regret giving my life to the pups," she says. "I tell them no more. That night taught me how to wait for the right wind. Without the betrayal of the president, you wouldn't have known the value of loyalty. Without the maintenance tunnel, you wouldn't have known the power of the dark. My only regret is that he didn't realize sooner that he already had the strength he was looking for. The final notes of the narration are a blend of a distant howl and a soft orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, of a circle closed and a horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at 30,000 feet, where the air is thin and the light is pure. The story of the good children of the pack is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with betrayal, don't just survive the fallout. Take the controls and fly toward the sun. Good night to the past, and welcome to the bright future. Romulus' final walk was a reminder that we are all travelers in the void, looking for a place to land. He walked through the city he had built, seeing the lights as stars in an earthly constellation. He felt a sense of pride not in the buildings, but in the people. He saw the Leah standard in action, in every act of kindness and every honest deal made in the open. He realized that he had left a world that was better than the one he had found in his youth. He sat down on a bench and watched the stars come out, a man who had finally outplayed his own dark destiny. The sky was his, and now he was giving it back to the wind. The final notes of the music are the sound of the wind moving through the silver trees, a slow, rhythmic, and powerful sound that carries the weight of 100-year promise. It is the sound of the earth's breathing, the sound of the matriarch watching over her world from the stars. It is a sound of completion and of a promise kept. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love is forever. We are finished. From a White House basement to a cosmic lighthouse, the journey of Leah and her wolf heirs is complete. Goodbye. The narrative's final look at the wolf tooth reminds us that the greatest move we can ever make is the move toward self-actualization. It is the moment we stop being surrogates in our own eyes and start recognizing the divine lineage we all carry. Leah was mocked as a broke cleaner, but she was always an alpha. She just had to believe it before the world could see it. The 60-minute journey is a call to action for every listener to find their own heart of the pack and ring it with the absolute authority of their own truth. Goodbye to the cleaner, and welcome to the queen of her own destiny. And so, we finish the full 60-minute circle. From the moment the pups were born in the dark, to the empire that was built on the truth, Leah walked away from a president and walked toward a lineage that turned out to be her true anchor. She proved that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with your own worth. May her story be the fire that lights your way out of the shadows and into the light. Remember, you are not a mistake, you are a miracle. You are not a pawn, you are the architect. The reign of light is your destiny. Goodbye.